welcome everyone to the live for this week, and thank you to the people who have sent through some questions for me to consider and to talk to the group about. I can certainly come up with questions myself, but it's always nicer when I get genuine questions from people within the group, because then I can make sure that I'm addressing some of the things that are of interest to you. So this question actually came through on Monday, and I'd been chatting with someone offline, and they'd said to me that they had found themselves in a scenario where they had, in their words, they had failed at a task. So they'd put themselves out there, they'd had a go at something, and then it hadn't come off the way they wanted it to, and in their words, they had failed in the task. But more specifically than that, for them, what was troubling them was that they were getting caught in that negative thinking spiral that can come after disappointment. And they kind of said to me, well, you know, where do you even start looking at that? So it's such a great question, but what we also know is there's so many answers to that. So there's lots of strategies that you can adopt when you've come off the back of a disappointment. So I'm going to speak to one of those today. Part of the reason I'm not going to speak to all of them is, and you'll hear me say this many times, I'm not a big fan of taking on a dozen strategies and putting them all in place. I think what we're better off served to do, my experience is just take one small strategy, test it out, try it, see how that's going, and if that's working well for you, then you can either keep going with it, or if it's not working, then you can try something else. So this whole topic around how we manage the outcomes in life, whether that be in sport or whether it be in anything else, is something that I've spent most of my career looking at, in fact. The very first piece of research that I actually independently did myself was many decades ago, and I was working at that stage with a younger population. So I was really interested in how people, but particularly children, understand the disappointments and the successes that we experience, particularly in a sports setting. And what I was curious about was whether children could understand the differences between perhaps winning but not being as happy about the outcome, and then those moments when perhaps we don't win but we still feel satisfied or happy about the outcome or our performance within it. So that was basically the area of research that I was looking into. So broadly, I looked at 4 categories of outcome. So I looked at those times when we win and we're happy about it. That's a pretty obvious one to understand. I also looked at that when we lose and we're disappointed. So again, that's another thing that makes a lot of sense to us. But then there's 2 other ways of thinking about win and loss that's a little bit more sophisticated in the thinking. So the idea would be that could children understand that sometimes we win, but we don't wholly feel satisfied with the actual outcome. So it was what I would call in the research a dissatisfied success. And then could children also comprehend what I called a satisfied loss? So, you know, you don't get the chocolates, you don't win the prize, whatever it might be, but there's enough within the activity and your performance that you feel good about that. Now, I didn't use any of those labels with the children, but broadly those were the 4 kind of categories that I looked at, because up until then the research was primarily, it assumed that winning was good and losing was bad, and my feeling was that that's, you know, the way humans think, it's a little more sophisticated than that. So I was curious to see if children could make that distinction. So I actually looked at children who were 8 years of age and children who were 10 years of age. And obviously this is a long time ago now, and those children are long grown up. But what we found was, when I did that research, is it was a lot more clear cut, predominantly for 8-year-olds. Winning is good, losing is bad. And they really didn't have the comprehension around those less structured, the more ambiguous outcomes. But the 10-year-olds broadly got it, of the groups that I interviewed. So they could understand that notion of the dissatisfied win and the satisfied loss. And I think in some ways that sophistication is something that can help us when we're going through any sporting event or any kind of event where we're putting ourselves out there and we might feel that we're successful or unsuccessful. So there's no doubt that within sport there is very clear-cut outcomes. So there is winning and losing, particularly when you've got team sports. You know, basketball team, one scores 45 points, one scores 40 points, final who to goes. One team has won, one team has lost. A running race, you know, you've got your three that might take to the podium, and then you've got those that don't. So you might choose to look at that as winning, and whether that be the first place person or the people that reach the podium. So sometimes that's quite clear cut, the idea of winning and losing. What's not clear cut are the phrases to succeed and to fail in sport. Those are really ambiguous terms, and they're very much subjective terms. So we all define those things in different ways. So in terms of how you manage it and whether that thinking sticks with you after an outcome to the point that it becomes unhelpful, so it keeps you awake at night, it keeps you kind of reliving the experience and being annoyed or disappointed about it, those sorts of factors, there are some things that you can do about that to help you manage through and to be more successful next time. Where I would start with that is listen very carefully to the language that you use around success and disappointment. Because as I said, success and disappointment is a subjective experience. It's not like, you can objectively say with the facts, I came first or I came second, whatever it might be. That team scored more than I did. So what we know is that success and failure are subjective terms. Winning and losing is more concrete. Where I'd err with some caution is when we start using the term failure. And because a lot of people, often try to avoid failure. That makes sense to me why people might want to do that. But sometimes I think if we think about our losses, our disappointments in a different way, it can help us get closer to our ultimate goal, whatever that might be. So often for people, they might see failure as having not been successful, but I think there's more to it than that. And I think that on the pathway to success, it would be unusual if we didn't dip into disappointments along the way. So there's no doubt when you're trying something new, when you're trying to excel at what it is that you're doing, you're not always going to get it right. So the way you manage those situations, because it's not always what happens to us that's important, but it's how we deal with it. And so I think the starting point before you even look at any kind of the psychological strategies on how to manage disappointment is how you even think about it in the first place. So the nice thing is that after watching this live, if you choose to, you don't need to go through failure anymore. Failure doesn't have to be part of who you are and what you do, because the way I like to think about it in these situations is you will either have the successes and the wins, and then listen to this distinction, or you learn. Because each time we don't reach our outcomes, each time it doesn't go the way that we planned it, each time we're not the first across the line or we're not the team with the most points, then as disappointing as that can be, it also, if we're clever about it and if we think about it in a helpful way, we can actually set ourselves up to be one step closer to being successful next time. So many of you have heard me say that, and others say, I'm not the only one to say it, that success leaves clues. So one of the great things about when you do have a win is I do suggest you think about why that happened. And whether that be a win in sport, a win during your week and how your nutrition's gone for the week and your sleep's gone for the week and your life's gone for the week, if you feel like you've had a great week, then don't miss out on the lessons that come from that success. Success leaves clues. If you know what the clues are, then you can rinse and repeat and hopefully have those happen for you again the next week. Disappointment works the same way. So each time something doesn't go the way we want it to, each time we lose, each time we travel through those times of disappointment, or if you want to use the phrasing, each time we fail, then there is also great opportunity for lessons in there for us. So the starting point I would have you think about, or encourage you to think about, is that you don't have to go through failure anymore. What you go through now is an opportunity to learn. Now, sure, we'd rather be successful the first time, but that's just not the way life typically goes for us. But if we can be more curious, and that's why I've got Dr. Joe Lukens is feeling curious as part of my tag for this particular live. If we become curious when something doesn't go our way, if we can look at the lessons, like what happened in this situation, how could I have done this differently? How could I be better next time? What did this actually look like for me? If we take the opportunity to learn the lessons from the disappointment, then we get wisdom. If all we do is we tell ourselves that we failed and we were terrible and it was a loss and there we go again and so forth, it'll have us feeling quite negative about the whole experience, and then we'll be less likely to learn the lessons, and then we'll be much less likely to be able to move on from that experience with the wisdom to get us closer to success next time. So it's a small distinction, but it's an important one. I'm a big fan that the language we use is incredibly important, and saying that we have failed at something, that's a pretty significant thing to say, because there's always an opportunity to learn. So that's probably, I guess, the key answer that I had for this person when they said, so the question to me was, Jo, I keep getting stuck because I've had this disappointment and I keep reliving it and I'm so annoyed with myself and so forth, and I don't know how to move on. Well, the only way to move on is to accept that the loss and the disappointment happened, and that somewhere sitting in there is a lesson to be learned, and spending some time being curious about that, wondering about what that is, will get you a step closer to the clues that will lead you towards success. Now, there's no doubt the disappointment hurts, it stings when it happens, so spend a bit of time to absorb whatever the moment is, depending on how significant it was for you. But definitely there are lessons in there, there's little nuggets of gold hiding there in the disappointment, and if we can sift through it and try and work out what some of those things are, then that can become part of our planning, part of our learning, so that we can move forward the next time we go out there and have a go, and hopefully get a little bit closer to that success. So there's more strategies we could do, and maybe you've got a question for me about what they might be. Every Monday in the group we'll put a little post up inviting you to click on now we've worked out how to do it, click on the message button, and you can send me a direct message, which is how I got this particular question this week. So you can just send that through. You can put it into the chat if you like. You can put it onto the post if you're comfortable to do that. But every week, as I said, on a Wednesday, I'll have a look through some of the questions that have come through there, and one that will catch my eye, I'll make sure that I speak to that within the group and addressing the content that you're interested in. So thanks for jumping into the live, and hope you're having a great week, and I'll see you again next week.